product services to them. So some of my some of the things I've learned are geared towards organizations where you're building and leading through others. And I find nothing better than leveraging my time by letting others do the work instead of me. That said, you know, you've got to put the systems in place, and you've got to lead people, and but you can really grow tremendously once you've those leadership paths in place. So I wanted to give you, I'll give you a little bit of background about where I am now, and then trace you through how I got here. I currently am CEO of Capital Teas. Capital Teas has 3 stores at this point. We are a retail tea boutique. We have a store that we founded in Annapolis in 2007. And then we kind of experimented to get the model right. And we did that for several years, and then in 2010, we embarked on an aggressive growth strategy. In June of last year, we opened our 2nd store at the National Harbor, if you've been there, just across from Alexandria. And that did so well so soon that we then opened a 3rd store in November in Bethesda. Now, on the plate this year are plans to open 7 more stores. And we've also rented a distribution warehouse center in Annapolis and a headquarters office, and we're actually going to take back over our house and garage, which we have surrendered to tea storage at this point. But it's been a fun business, and the way we get into it, I co-founded it with my wife. She is 5th generation of her family in the tea business. So I think in every company, it's nice when you have some barrier to entry or some competitive advantage or some story. So there's no real barriers to entry in starting a tea business. You can do it. You can do it tomorrow. But what we have is a 120-year tradition that we've been able to leverage, and we've also been able to leverage the success of the 4th generation of my wife's family, her mother and her uncle, who together operate a company. Her uncle owns it in Australia called Elmstock Tea, and it's a large wholesale tea distributor, I believe the largest in Australia. And her mother, who's the U.S. representative for that company. So we bought our first teas from my wife's mother, my mother-in-law. We now have many vendors. We think last count we have 1,500 SKU items in our stores. But it's been a lot of fun. I was able to grow that remotely for a few years. I served as a lawyer in New York City. And now I'm doing it on a full-time basis, and we're driving things forward, applying the lessons that I've learned running several businesses in the past. So I wanted to, I'll talk to you more about tea a little later, but I wanted to step you through, how I think organizations run effectively and some of the lessons that I've learned. What I tried to do, I was just thinking about this last night, and I thought if I stepped you through my career, I learned lessons along the way, and I was curious in putting it down on paper where the primary lessons came from, and I will attribute an awful lot of it to military service. I think the foundation of my success and everything I have done really came from my training at the U.S. Naval Academy and as a junior officer in the Navy. I can't encourage people highly enough, more highly to embark, young people to embark upon at least investigating that as a possibility, because the leadership lessons and the life lessons that you learn there are so fundamental, and they've really served me well. So I graduated in 1985. In the submarine service, you have to go to nuclear power training, and then you have to go to nuclear prototype training, and it's hard. It's very hard. If being a plebe at the Naval Academy was hard, if that's a 10, then going through nuclear power school is at least a 20. It's quite hard. But you succeed, you get past that wicket, and then you go into a submarine, and then you start learning all over again. So from 1987, February of 87 until June of 1990, I served on the USS Shark, which was a nuclear fast attack submarine of the Skipjack class, a very old submarine. It was commissioned in 1961. It was supposed to be decommissioned in 1981. I served from 87 to 90 aboard this ship. So it was old, but it was part of Ronald Reagan's and John Lehman's 600 ship Navy, if you remember that. And it was the end of the Cold War, and we were beating the Soviets by outspending them militarily, and really the strategy ultimately worked. But during the late 80s, it was a fun time to be in submarines because there were operational missions that were somewhat exciting. That said, for every moment of excitement, you had hundreds of moments of boredom or drudgery, but there were still the moments that you lived for of excitement where the training paid off. I tried to look at the lessons that I learned as a submarine officer And I broke them into 6 categories, and I still basically employ a lot of these lessons and actually say a lot of these things to my staff today. So the first one I want to talk about is individual strength. I think that all of you, none of you would be here if you didn't have these sorts of individual strengths. But I just wanted to reiterate that I think that among them, and anybody who's going to be a successful entrepreneur, personal discipline, a strong work ethic, individual accountability, adaptability, and then the 5th one I said, don't let the bastards get you down. And all of those, I think that one of the lessons I learned in the submarine force on individual accountability came from, you may have heard of Admiral Rickover. Admiral Rickover was the father of the nuclear navy. His tradition is still ever present today. And he was all about individual accountability, in that if something went amiss, there had to be a single person or a group of people that you could point to. And unless you could establish, clear paths of accountability, then you weren't going to be able to rectify situations. So at every step of every procedure in a nuclear submarine, when you start up a reactor, when you do anything, you initial or sign. So there's always one person that you can point to that they either did that step or they didn't do that step. But those lessons I find very important, even today, or even as you go forward, and we talk about when I write business plans. I think many people make mistakes in business plans. I think what they do is they write this document that then sits in a drawer and collects dust, and basically they just wasted their time or wasted some time in writing it. What I like to do with business plans is to make them interactive documents that you then take the business plan and you go quarterly. So when I have department head meetings, we'll take out the business plan, and the business plan has on it this item of individual accountability. So if we're doing A, B, C, D, and E, then you're responsible for A, you're responsible for B, you're responsible for C, and you come back to the next meeting that we have and report on your success or success or failure in fulfilling an objective or where you are. By giving this level of individual accountability and assigning bullet items directly from the business plan, your business plan then becomes a living, breathing document that's actually being used as opposed to sitting in the drawer. If it's going to sit in the drawer, then don't write it. I mean, why bother? But by doing it this way, you have a document that people can use. And again, I learned that as a submarine officer, even though we weren't writing any business plans. The next thing was teamwork and team building. Again, Admiral Rickover did something in the submarine force that one wouldn't think could be possible. And he, as a pretty old admiral, actually interviewed every single officer for the submarine service. And if you didn't get past Admiral Rickover, then you were done. That was it. Now, Admiral McKee, who I interviewed with, was his successor. There have been several admirals that have succeeded him, and they follow that same path, basically. So every single person gets interviewed. When I ran, the largest company I've run to date was XRT, and I had 100 staff of my own. Then when I was acquired and bought by a French public company, we had together 550 people. I never stopped employing the exact same standards. I interviewed every single person that we employed. Now, I didn't screen everyone. And when it came down to it, we had a system set up for 5 interviews for every person to get hired. They needed to have 4 yeses before I saw them. And then I would be the go, no go. But I still saw every single person that was at that point, and I made a decision. And if I didn't like them, we didn't hire them. And that was all there was to it. Now, the other thing, the flip side of that was, if any one of the, when I set it up for interviews, there were people that I brought in for interviews, and I set it up that I know I can make mistakes too. Anybody of the 5 that I chose to interview that person could also be to the person. So if it wasn't 100%, no hire. And that's something that in today's market can certainly be done by organizations, because there's a lot more job seekers than there are jobs, unfortunately. But for those that are building organizations, I think it's a good way to proceed. The other thing in building teams, I think it's really essential to surround yourself with people you can trust. If you're going to go lie on a beach somewhere, or if you're going to go somewhere else and you're going to leave the keys of the kingdom to someone else, then they need to be people you can trust. And I find that in capital T's, that's paramount. We have a cash business in many ways. As we continue to grow, there's a lot of cash that changes hands, and you have to have people around you that you can trust. Also, in building a warehouse, it's very easy for inventory to walk off of a shelf into somebody's bag. And so, again, it's really important to have people that you can trust. And the other thing that I find in building teams that is really key, and I've done this all along, and it's diversity. And I don't think diversity is a four-letter word. I think this diversity is key to building an organization. I can tell you that when I ran my XRT, as an example, a software company, one of my vice presidents was a 68-year-old retired woman who was a Catholic school teacher before she came to me. And I put her, she was my senior vice president of customer service, and she was phenomenal. And everyone in the world loved her, and every kid that came through that, through XRT that was trained by her was better off for it, and she was a role model. And her name was Dolores. Now, Dolores and I didn't have a lot in common other than having gone to Catholic schools, but it was great to have, you know, that level of diversity in age and gender and race. At capital T's, I can tell you that I am one of the few white males in the company at this point, but that's just the way it is. I mean, I look for people that can add to the team. I could care less what color their skin is, what their religion is, what their age is. And so it is important, though, to me that there is some level of diversity so that everybody thinks a little bit differently, when they come from different backgrounds. And when they think a little bit differently and you can get them on the same page, I find that your page is a lot better. So that's teamwork. The next lesson I learned in the Navy was procedures. And I hated some of this stuff, and I still think it's tough to do, and that's checklists and preventive maintenance and training and testing and qualification sheets. But it's so paramount. I mean, I find even now today, like at Capital T's, we're bringing new people on board. When a new person comes on board, we have 120 types of tea. And customers always come in and ask, well, what about this tea? What's in that tea? What tea is good for this? What are the health benefits? They need to know what to say. For example, in health benefits, they shouldn't say that there's health benefits to anything, but what they can say, as a lawyer will know, is it has been reported. You know, so we can certainly report the news. We're not going to specifically claim any health benefit that the FDA hasn't approved that we can say. But there are plenty of studies about what the health benefits of tea may be that we can point to and show and talk about that. But a new person needs to know those things. How are they going to know it unless there is some sort of training program and some sort of testing program and some sort of qualification program? Because the last thing you want to do in this day and age is have something on Yelp saying that I went to this store and they didn't know a damn thing about what they were talking about, and they didn't even know that Earl Grey tea has bergamot oil in it, or, you know, et cetera, you know. So in this day and age where everything gets rated, where the world is out there, I think it's more important than ever to have some sort of training, testing, and qualification program. And there's a very important phrase that I'm sure Ingar knows well, and again, I hate to attribute one more thing to Admiral Rickover, but I believe this is it. Don't expect what you don't inspect. And I have learned that and used that in my entire life. Don't expect what you don't expect. So on a submarine, if a valve is in a certain position where it's going to flood the people tank, which is really bad for water to come into the people tank, because then you die, and somebody says that the valve is shut, the valve isn't shut until you have personally checked that the valve is shut. And you learn that right away. And it's so important. And the same in any business. I mean, you can't, Ronald Reagan was great in his phrase, trust but verify. Well, the same sort of thing. And you have to verify. You have to absolutely go there and do it yourself. And I don't think there's any substitution for that. The next lesson I learned in the Navy was survival. And that meant contingency planning, adaptability, quick thinking and quick action, and survival in emergencies. And survival is important in any business. I don't think there's any business out there that hasn't faced some sort of setback. I can tell you that toward the latter part of XRT, at the end of the day when we had made a decision to sell the company, we had $10 million in sales, I had 100 staff, but I was interested in selling the company for multiple reasons, not least of which I didn't think that a company that size in the software world could continue because of the Oracles and the PeopleSoft and the SAPs that could outspend me in a day what I would spend in a year on R&D. So I wanted to sell the company, and after going through 6 months of bidding for us and getting 5 bids from other companies, we accepted one offer and we turned the other 4 down. A month and a half later, that company backed out of the deal. So we found ourselves in a bit of a crisis, a bit of an emergency situation, because I'd also positioned ourselves to sell, and that had been the primary focus. But I think by applying some quick thinking, some adaptability, thinking outside the box, we then went and positioned ourselves. We hadn't really positioned ourselves for sale in Europe. Within about a week or two of that company, which is an American company, pulling out of the deal, I had a suitor lined up in France to buy us, and the actual acquisition price was close to $30 million. And we were able to turn that around in about 2 weeks after being essentially dead in the water. So I think quick thinking, quick action, adaptability, jumping outside the box, it's all part of that survival training that's key. The next point, and the fifth and the sixth, I would say, is leadership. I think it's the most important, and it's the most important in growing is leadership, because without leadership, then you're stuck doing it yourself, and you can't do everything yourself. You have to be able to lead others to fulfill the mission for you. In leadership, I think that the lesson you learned in the Navy is take care of your people, and your people will take care of you. And that applies everywhere. So building esprit de corps, lessons learned like praising in public and reprimanding in private, directing and coordinating different professionals. And I think the most important part is communication. I find that bad leadership in bad companies, because I've coached other companies, I've gone in, I'm a board member in several companies. If you go to the root cause of some of the problems in other companies, it's failure to communicate. So if people aren't on the same page, then how can they be expected to be achieving the same thing? What I like to do, and I try to put it on business cards, and any company that I've joined, is to somehow put a mission statement or some sort of slogan or something on the business card so that people know that you're on the same page. We'll get the capital T's, I'll tell you in a bit, and I'll tell you a slogan that we've come up with that's a bit innovative in what we do there. But I think it's important. You see this at like the Ritz-Carlton. If you ever know anybody that works at Ritz-Carlton, on the back of every Ritz-Carlton card, you'll see the mission statement of Ritz-Carlton. And you know it's a fine set of hotels. And you know that you're going to get consistent good quality, that everybody's on the same page. And just applying that lesson, I think that's a leadership lesson. Final lesson from the Navy is warfare. And that is to study your opponents, to anticipate their moves, to engage them as necessary, and to win the war, not just the battle. So every business has competitors. You have to decide whether or not they're competitors you want to engage in a competitive fashion, or whether they're people that you want to build alliances with. And I think that there are good reasons to do both at different times. And sometimes those that you want to build an alliance with now, you may want to compete with later, or vice versa. And I think that it's very careful to be able to study with them. And this is like studying the market, knowing what the market's doing. My capital T's, our biggest competitor is Tivana. But Tivana is a much, much bigger company than we are. But they're still our biggest competitor, and I watch them very carefully. I have them on Google Alerts. I watch everything that they do. I go into their stores at least once a week. I make sure that I understand what they're doing. And that doesn't mean I'm going to copy things, and I copy very little, but I try to do better. And I try to see, well, what have they done that might be able to be done in a different fashion or a better fashion. Maybe they have a great idea and I'll copy it. I can tell you that at Christmas time this year, we sell, among other things, cast iron teapots. And cast iron teapots are a very hot item right now. They're great because you can make tea by putting the water in a cast iron pot, putting the water on a stove, heating it up, and it has an infuser basket, so you just put the tea in there and pull it out when it's brewed, and then the cast iron will retain its warmth for 1 to 2 hours. So you've got basically a one-stop process to be able to use a cast iron teapot. And cast iron teapots are not inexpensive. I mean, they're a little bit pricey. And we had not been sampling our tea out of them. We had been sampling our tea out of glass teapots and other teapots and ceramic teapots. We didn't have any cast iron samples. And I went into a Tivana, I guess it was in sometime in November, and I had some of their oolong tea out of one of their cast iron teapots. And I called our store at National Harbor, and I said to the manager of the store, I'd like you to start sampling tea out of cast iron teapots today. And to have one in every store, and then we pulled them out of their stores and did that. I think we sold 9 cast iron teapots the day we started sampling out of teapots. So it's just little lessons that you can learn from your, learning that from a competitor, but it just made sense. And there are other things that we do that are completely different from them, but I think it's important no matter what business you're in to study your opponents and to engage as necessary. The other thing that I think it's really important is if you're going to engage, and you're going to engage in some sort of competitive fashion, and this can be in the software world, this can be in the retail world, it can be anywhere. I like a phrase, don't polish the cannonball. So if you think about back in terms of what is a cannonball's purpose, it's going to be shot out from a ship and it's going to strafe the enemy and it's going to, splinter their decks. And if you're going to engage the enemy, then there's no need for that cannonball to be polished. Lesson learned, you don't have to have the best product in the world. You don't have to have bug-free software to sell it. You just have to have software that can achieve its objective, and then someone will come along and fit, Actually, you'll, but as we heard from one of our guests here today, but if you fix that software or you'll have a service contract, but if you wait till it's bug-free, you'll never sell it, because there's no such thing as bug-free software. And I think that that's so true in many different ways. Do you want to have, if you're in a retail world, do you want to have the best packaging in the world, or do you want to sell your product? Well, I'd say sell your product, adapt your packaging over time, make it better, but sell the product and do it now. So again, don't polish the cannonball. So I moved out of the Navy in 1990, and I had a chance to go into the software world. And I went to this small company, XRT, in Pennsylvania. So a lot of us were talking about Philadelphia. I spent the next 10 years in the Philadelphia suburbs, and I had grown up there as well before I went to the Navy. So for those of you that are Eagles and Flyers fans, we had a good talk on that earlier. But Philadelphia is a great place, and there's a lot going on there, and I learned an awful lot of lessons in business building in Philadelphia, and they included, just the general categories: sales, finance, law, business lifespan, all things. These are things I didn't learn in the Navy, and innovation. I'm going to talk a little bit about each of those. In sales, and we've talked about this before, I think one of the most important characteristics in any entrepreneurial organization is selling. And in selling, the thing I've learned is it doesn't matter what your product is, and it doesn't matter what your service is. People buy from people. So the most important thing you can do is establish a rapport and a relationship with the person. To give you an idea, if you come into one of my tea shops, and I do take shifts on the floor with my staff, and you were to come into a tea shop, I'm not going to assault you with what's your favorite tea. I am going to talk to you about some characteristic or something that I see in common. It could be that I see, you look like you're in the military, or you look like we have something in common. And we're going to talk about something there where there's an area where I can establish a personal rapport. And we might do that for 5 minutes before we ever talk about tea, because the key is building the personal relationship. And if you're successful at doing this, then the person's going to turn around and they're going to then ask your advice, and then you're going to give it to them and they're going to take it. And the best example of this I can say is that when I was at XRT, I was able to sell to Sony Corporation of America treasury management systems for all of the Sony USA companies. And I did it talking Star Trek. And I spoke for about 15 to 20 minutes of a half-hour meeting about Star Trek. And then we talked the rest of the time about the software system, and ultimately we got that sale. And I had my VP of sales with there, punching me in the ribs, wondering when I was going to turn to the software. And you realize people buy from people. So the software, then they don't need to go a whole lot further. I was able to sell to 200 Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 companies, and we sold them treasury management software systems that handle all of their day-to-day finances and all of their transactions, all their banking interfaces, so we linked to about 500 banks. So it was a really important product for them, but it was still sold on the basis of human relationships and trust. And tea is no different. It's something you're going to, you're going to drink the beverage, establish the rapport, and then give a good sound recommendation. I learned a lot about the law at XRT, and I subsequently went to law school. And I found that in running a business, the 3 important things that you need to know. You need to know the business of the business, you need to know the financing of the business, and you need to know the legal aspects of the business. And they're kind of like a 3-legged stool. And I subsequently went to law school because I felt that I didn't know enough about the law. And I wanted to engage more in that area, which you couldn't really learn on the job as much as you can by going to law school and then practicing law. And it's such an important part of our society in this country. That again, for those that can go to law school, I think it's a fantastic education. And I also found it to be, I went to law school when I turned 40. I went for 3 years and had a total blast. In fact, the first year I did some business consulting and law school at night, and I said, the heck with this, I'm going full-time to law school. So if you can have the financial freedom to not work for a couple of years, I engaged in every extracurricular activity I could. I was on the International Commercial Arbitration team. We went to Vienna, Austria, and competed against schools all over the world. Of course, I was the oldest student, but I didn't care. It was a blast. It was really a lot of fun. In fact, as a side note, the competition in Austria was called the Willem Vis Moot competition, and my son Willem was actually conceived there, so we named him Willem. Someday I hope he goes to the competition. The other thing I learned at XRT, and then I applied it to all lessons subsequently, is innovation. There's nothing more important, I think, well, other than leadership, than innovation. You have to constantly innovate. What makes you better, what makes you more attractive, is to find a market gap or a need, look to see how others accomplish it, and innovate for a better solution. So, you know, one of the things we look at innovation, there's a phrase, and I copied the exact word down this morning because I wanted to make sure that I quoted it right. Everything that can be invented has been invented. The Commissioner of U.S. Patents, 1899. You know, so the other one, I found this on the internet when I looked at that. This is great. The concept is interesting and well-formed, but in order to earn better than a C, the idea must be feasible. It was a Yale professor commenting on Fred Smith's paper proposing an overnight delivery service. He subsequently founded FedEx. So innovation is always possible. And I think if you can think and believe in your ideas, you can innovate. So as an example, tea is a multi-thousand-year-old business. How can you possibly innovate in tea? Well, I can give you an example of what somebody else has done. I'm going to pass it around, and I'm going to give you an example of what we have done. So tea was not bagged until 1903. And when it was first bagged, it was put into silk sacks. In 1904, tea bags became commercially available. So it wasn't until about 40 years later that the Lipton tea bags that you're familiar with became commercially available. And so, you know, it took tea a long time to get there. Well, in 2004, 60 years after the rectangular tea bag became available, Tea Forte, which is one of the products we carry, came out. And these, I'm going to pass around and feel free to take one, are tea bags this century. And they are tea bags in mesh bags in a triangular pyramid. Different, whole leaf tea in a bag, innovative, nice packaging. The bottom line is that you can innovate in the tea business even in a multi-thousand-year-old product. So what have we done at Capital Teas to innovate? Well, I came up with the idea that tea isn't something just to drink, but as you are all smelling these now, tea is something you can smell. So we came up with the phrase, stop and smell the teas, like stop and smell the roses. I trademarked it because I've learned enough about law. Then I actually spoke with the trademark examiner personally, and we got the registered trademark for stop and smell the teas. And we have a tea sniffing wall at each of our stores. So when you come into any Capital Teas store, you'll see a sniffing wall where you can stop and smell the teas. And you'll see 120 airtight glass jars on the wall. And you can go up and you can interact, you can see the tea, you can open the airtight lid and smell the tea. And then there are several that are available for tasting each day. So we're engaging multiple senses. And it's a way to be innovative in tea. So I would wager that if we can be innovative in a product as old as tea, and there's just two examples between the tea bags and the sniffing wall, that you can be innovative in just about anything you do in any business. So that's that's a lesson learned on innovation that I think is important.
Did you put these into Payway? I saw these at Payway, or maybe they just ordered from the same place.
These are all these. This is not our product. This is Tea Forte,
okay.
And we carry it, and it's carried by many fine hotels. And this is the only tea bag that we carry, because everything else we carry is loose tea. But this is such a beautifully done tea bag. I have a mindset to come up with our own tea bag at some point, and I have an innovative design for that too, but I need to order 1 million of them, literally, and I have not yet had the desire to engage in that sort of financial outlay for tea bags yet, but we will. once we get to 10 stores and beyond, I think we'll do that. I have a number of other things that I wanted to talk about, but I'll lead you through, we've got 5 or so minutes, and I'll lead you through some of the other highlights of them. I built up XRT until the end of the 1990s and sold it, and I talked a little bit about that. I then wasn't sure what to do, but I thought about things, and I do have one non-success on my resume, and my non-success is not success financially, but it was a success in terms of an educational lesson, and that's a company called Charitex. So I started this company in April of 2000 with the idea of taking what I had learned in the financial software world and applying it to the nonprofit sector. And I had a business plan that I built, and again, this was at the end, towards the end of the tech bubble, but it was based on garnering outside capital, and it needed $5 million of outside capital to get the profitability. And I funded it for 1.5 years on my own. The bottom line is we were never able to attract that outside capital. Even though we got to 11 full-time staff, we had 20 nonprofit clients such as Habitat for Humanity and the New York City Legal Aid Society and 2 different archdioceses. The problem was that we weren't profitable, and that the tech bubble had burst and there was no money available. So I shut that company down. I learned some lessons there. I can tell you that I'll never start another company where I need somebody else's capital to make it succeed. The only capital the capital T's needs is to grow faster. It doesn't need any capital to exist. It doesn't need any capital to grow slowly. The only capital we need is to grow faster. And that's a temporary phenomenon, because I think that by the end of this year, we won't need any capital to grow faster, because we're on a very good upward swing right now. So subsequent to Charitex, I did that for 1.5 years. Found myself again in a situation where, what do? I never believed in just rolling over. So while I investigated what to do, I went and got a real estate broker's license. I sold real estate in Manhattan, and I bought a property on Park Avenue and renovated it in Manhattan, and I did a few waterfront developments in Annapolis. So that was my non-intellectual phase of my life. You can make money in real estate development. Anybody can. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to do it. But it, to me, wasn't as intellectually stimulating as doing something else. And what I was trying to do then, I wanted to serve my country again. I positioned myself through networking again through the Naval Academy, and an admiral that took me on board and made me his mentee, and I was appointed to a senior position at Homeland Security, which is a bit of a kludge of an organization on its startup. It was a very tough place to work, but I still learned a few good lessons, and the lessons I learned were that the federal bureaucracy is a tough place, but you got to understand how it works. The people, however, are wonderful. And I really had a great appreciation for the federal employees, a much better appreciation for the people than for the system. I think the system needs substantial overhaul. I don't know how to do that. I don't know that anybody's known how to do that. But the people are wonderful. And I also understand the other big lesson I learned there is there's great value in public-private partnerships. And to the degree that I can advocate those or participate in those, I think they're key. Subsequent to there, I went to Georgetown Law School. And as a lawyer, I have learned that the most important things for business, I think, are intellectual property, contracts, and tax law. I mean, there's many types of law that are fun. Constitutional law is great, but I think a key understanding of intellectual property, understanding the contracts, and understanding the tax law, are really essential. And then my final thing I want to talk about is at capital T's, and what everybody should be focusing on now is social media and new ways of doing things. We have recently done a Groupon, which is a great, cool way to expose yourself out there. We have Facebook and Twitter accounts, and we actually, since I'm at 47 years old, a little bit beyond my prime in doing these things, I've hired a 23-year-old to manage my Facebook and my Twitter and all those accounts for me on a daily basis. And I think it's really important to put the right people on the job. And he's far better at it than I am. And it's cool to see the kind of exposure you get. And we are constantly innovating. So the latest thing, I had a meeting last week, and I think we're about to sign on to a bartering company where we were able to basically provide capital T's gift certificates in return for bartering credits within a bartering network, so when you have a store painted or something else done, do that. So there's so many innovative ways to proceed. And what I wanted to do is to hand out something that I came up with in terms of my rules for building an entrepreneurial organization. And it's quick. And it's kind of a synopsis of some of the things I've just said. And as you hand them out, basically it says, plan with T and lead with spice. And as you plan with T, T stands for track, execute, and adapt. Track, you need to know where you stand in order to act. Execute, you must pull the trigger. You can't just analyze the data. You must pull the trigger and you must execute. Adapt, you have to understand that things don't always go the way that you had planned, and you have to change your plan to adapt. As you lead with spice, the first thing you have to do in any entrepreneurial organization is sell. And if all else fails, sell. And if all else fails again, sell. There's nothing more important than that's at the top of every list I would have. The second would be persist. You know, when things don't go well, or when people think that your idea is wrong, or if you believe in yourself and have faith in your ideas, you need to persist. Next is to innovate, and we've talked a lot about that. Next is to communicate, up and down. Everybody needs to be on the same page. You need to tell the world what you're doing. And finally, in an entrepreneurial organization, expand. Grow it, continue to grow it, and really another E would be exit. So expand and know when to exit. And that's pretty much the lessons I've learned the last few years, and I hope to learn a bunch more the next 40.
Thanks, Peter.
And I'm happy to take any questions.
Yeah, we've got a couple minutes left for some questions, so if you have any questions.
I do have one.
Okay.
And your experience is fascinating.
Thanks.
You know, Marty leaned over and said, he did all that in one lifetime? So you said something that resonated with me, and it was regarding training people and giving them the right skills. So do you have, I imagine you do, an onboarding process that you follow consistently? Anytime anybody new comes on board, a series of steps that everyone goes through?
We have a loose one in place right now that we are formalizing at Capital T. So we're still, Capital T's is still a young company with only about 12 employees. But yes, we're in the process of formalizing the training procedures and the training tests right now. To date, they've been ad hoc before. At XRT, they were very formalized. And they were written tests as well on employment as well as along the way. And in the Navy, they were absolutely formalized.
Well, it's kind of a long-winded question. Well, first of all, it's a really wonderful talk you gave. My brother went to school in Vienna and took all his classes in German, and I worked at Electric Boat and built submarines.
Oh, cool.
So that was very, very special. My father was a two-star admiral that flew with John McCain, and so yeah, it's home for me as a Navy. You know, travel around. So did my time in the Navy as a dependent. But my question is. I was just talking to somebody I've known for a long time about geothermal, which is huge. I'm trying to get a division of his HVAC company together for him, geothermal. Drilling has quadrupled in the last 4 years, sales for drilling companies. It's phenomenal. And I was talking to this business owner, and I was saying, you know, you're kind of a realist, and I'm kind of an idealist. Maybe that's a good match. And I was thinking that listening to you talk, if you're familiar with the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, they talk about the public victory and the private victory. And you have very much a great talk on the public victory and touch some on the private victory. But and this is a little bit open-ended question, but if you have any comments about the private victory, it's more of an idealistic nature of a character, or you talk about being a Catholic, or that type of thing, where that comes into play. Because I think a lot of times people overlook the fact that you just have to have character, you just have to be the type of person, or it's kind of a house of cards that eventually falls.
Well, I think that among the personal strengths, you have to have honor and integrity, and perhaps I neglected to mention that up front because it's so key to everything that I think going through the Naval Academy, you learn it early on, and we had an honor concept of a midshipman will not lie, cheat, or steal, and it's imbued in you at a very early age. And if I pass it over in my comments, it's because I almost thought it was second nature. But I would never want to be associated with those around me that weren't honorable. So that's, I guess in terms of people you can trust, there's nothing more. You need to be able to rely on a person's word. I can tell you that I do value my word, and the biggest insult that anyone could ever put upon me was to doubt my word. So, I guess I don't know if that answers your question or not, but I certainly think honor and integrity are paramount.
All right. Well.